Welcome everyone to Jackson Josephine County's Small Woodlands Association presentation, Bear Aware, the Biology and Management of Black Bears in Oregon, presented by Matthew Vargas. My name is Jerry Burke and I will be your host. Tonight we will have a presentation for about an hour and then an opportunity to pose questions to the presenter. Please write your questions in the chat window where they will be read after the presentation. Speaker Matthew Vargas graduated from Oregon State University with a degree in biology and has been working for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for 5 years, all of which have been in the Central Point office in Jackson County. Currently, he is the wildlife conflict biologist for the Rogue Watershed District, which includes all of Jackson, Josephine, and Curry counties. His main duties include managing all human-wildlife conflict issues and coordinating with all of the wildlife rehabilitation and holding facilities within our district. In addition, Matthew assists in various biological surveys, habitat improvement projects, regulatory setting processes, and helps manage various recreational activities. Please welcome Matthew Vargas. Take it away.
All right, thank you. Yeah, some of you might recognize me from the last meeting when we talked about bobcats and cougars, so I'm back to talk about some bears. Name's Matthew, and we are gonna go over bear biology and management here in Oregon, and particularly here in Southern Oregon, as that is my district. So I'm going to try to go through this and then leave plenty of time to answer any questions you guys have at the end. So let's get started. So again, I do this in all my presentations. Just put up our mission statement here at the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. It is to protect and enhance Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. So that kind of guides all our management decisions. We want to ensure habitat protection and species protection for all species in the state. And then second to that is to, have those species available for enjoyment by whatever you're doing, whether it's photography, hiking, wildlife watching, hunting, fishing, whatever your recreation is, we want to make sure those wildlife species are there for you to enjoy. So tonight, going to be focusing on black bears. All of our management decisions currently are outlined in our Oregon Black Bear Management Plan. We've had several adaptations of this plan, the most recent being in 2012. That's the current version we are using and still use. Not much has changed since then. If anybody is interested in more about the Oregon Black Bear Management Plan, it's a pretty big document. We're going to cover some highlights tonight, but if you really feel inclined to dive in the weeds, you could just Google ODFW Black Bear Management Plan, and it should be one of the first results that comes up as a PDF, and you can read the whole thing cover to back and get all the information you want out of there. So we have black bears in Oregon. There are no grizzly bears. At least there haven't been any officially confirmed grizzly bears in Oregon or really anywhere around Oregon. Eastern Idaho, I think, is the closest confirmed grizzlies right now. But I just want to throw this up. This is a snapshot from our website. A lot of times we get calls of people questioning if they saw a grizzly bear or not. Usually because our bears can get fairly big and because of the color. But just to keep in mind throughout this presentation, we only have black bears. The grizzly bears were extirpated from the state back in the late 1930s. The last one was shot and killed in Billy Meadows near Enterprise at that time. We haven't had a confirmed grizzly since then, but they're probably coming back. It might take 20 years from now, could be as quick as 10, but they'll be here again. But for now, until that time, if you see a bear in Oregon, it's a black bear, not a grizzly. And this is kind of one of the reasons I threw that last slide up, is because black bears come in so many different colors. It can confuse people sometimes. They're called black bears, but they're not always black. As you can see, up top here, we have this cinnamon or blonde phase. We got this brownish red. They can even be a little more brown than that. This is a pretty uncommon phase. It's real light color like this. I have never seen a black bear, in person, that color, but obviously they do exist like this. It's very rare. But as the name comes, black bear, majority of them are black. Sometimes there could be all black, and then actually quite frequently, as you can see in this photo, these black guys, they'll sometimes have a little white patch. Sometimes it's a V like this, sometimes it's a diamond, but on their chest, in front of their front legs, it is pretty common for a black phased bear like this to have a white patch. Not always, they can be solid black, but that is a trait of the black ones. So all these are black bears. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be referring to them as just black bears or bears, but I mean in any color phase, it's just the species black bear. So bears are abundant throughout the state. We got bears just about in every corner. You can see in the range map here that there is some density differences down here in the desert portion. It's not great habitat for them, so there's a lot fewer. Same with up in the Columbia Basin, those ag grasslands. Again, not the best habitat. They'll wander through every now and then, but not too often. Our big densities is this red color. So we got a good amount of high bear density up in the Northeast, and then along the coast, through the Cascades here. Our area here, Jackson, Josephine, and Curry County, we have an extremely high density of bears here. Arguably one of the most dense areas in the state reside right here where we're at. Utilize a wide range of habitat, as you can see from the map. They'll be anywhere from the coastal jungles to the high Cascades, even up in the Blue Mountains where you get real high elevation, those rocky alpine bluffs, they'll be up there. Even in the desert every now and then. So in our black bear management plan, bears are classified as a game mammal in Oregon. So that provides a pretty good level of protection and management monitoring efforts on our part. Being a game mammal, it does allow for recreational harvest by hunters. But with that comes some reporting requirements that we'll get into later. So some goals of our Oregon Black Bear Management Plan. These are straight out of the plan. We got 4 objectives. Obviously, the first one is to maintain a healthy black bear population while providing optimum recreational benefits. Those benefits, like I mentioned earlier, with our mission statement, can range from viewing to photography to hunting. And then part of that comes in with objective 2, to reduce the number of human bear conflicts. We'll get into that more later. We got a section on bear conflicts at the end of this here. Develop, refine, and evaluate population abundant estimate through modeling techniques. We'll get into our current modeling for population, as well as a former modeling effort that we used that we kind of got away from several years ago. And then just, we're always trying to better understand the species. Bears are no different, both how to manage them best, what kind of habitats they need. And we do that through various research methods. So mentioned earlier, we allow for recreational harvest. And with that comes some population monitoring and data collection. This might look a little familiar if any of you listen to my talk on cougars. We talked a little about teeth, and it's the same with bears. Bears here have 4 premolar teeth. So you got the molars here and here, the canines, and then these teeth right in between, very first tooth behind the canine and in front of the molars, that's the premolar tooth right there. So there's 2 on top, 1 there, 1 kind of in the background there. And normally there'd be 2 on the bottom. This bear has already been aged, so the 2 on the bottom were pulled already for aging, but you kind of see the indent there, and then there would have been the other one. Just as a side note, with this bear skull in particular, you kind of see the canines are broke off, and there's a couple teeth missing. The molars are worn down. This bear with those teeth we pulled came out to be 17 and a half years old, which is a fairly old bear. This was a female. They don't usually live too much longer than that. We have had some frequently get into the 20s. I believe we might have had one that actually reached into the low 30s. I'm not 100% sure on that, but we definitely had some in the high 20s before. So they're pretty long-lived animal. So that's the main thing, was the teeth to get the age. And then we got the reproductive tract here. These are the ovaries here, and it comes down to the uterine horn, and we will collect as many of these as we can from females. We can cut these open, and inside will be scars that will show how many fetuses were in there before they gave birth. So bears are typically 2. You might have a single every now and then. You might have 3. I've seen rare cases that are actually 4. So that lets us know how many young, particularly harvested female had the previous year, which goes into our model. And then the last thing is time and location. Pretty easy to get with hunter bears. We require all hunters to come into our office, bring the head in the reproductive tract where we get our samples. We have them show us on a map exactly where they killed it, when they killed it, which all goes into our data. We get a lot of roadkill bears. So again, the time of death might be a little subjective with a day or 2, but that's not a problem for our modeling. But we get the location nonetheless. So all that goes into our population estimates, and it's a model we have, and spits out a rough estimation of how many bears we have in the state. Roughly right now, we have anywhere from 25,000 to 30,000 bears in the state. So it's a pretty healthy bear population, quite abundant, and it's doing good. So this goes along the lines of the last slide, just data collection. These are all the bear mortalities we had from 2015 to 2017. You have the blue dots here are hunter harvests for the general season. You have non-hunt mortalities, so that's anything from administrative removals, which happens every now and then, to road kills, just being found dead. And then the red is, we do have a controlled spring bear hunting season. So the red is the spring bear season. That's a limited draw. And then the blue is the hunting season. That's over the counter general tag that anybody can buy. So you kind of see this goes along with that first map I showed you of the range estimations. Not too many bears are harvested down here in the desert. There's not a lot of them. They're pretty infrequent going through there. Same with Columbia Basin. And then you got a lot of bears up here in the Northeast. And like I said, our area down here, I mean, we have dots stacked on dots on dots on dots down here, especially in what we call the Applegate unit, which is essentially anything west of I-5 up to Grants Pass, and then the Redwood Highway would be east of the Redwood Highway in the California border there. So includes all of Applegate Lake, Cave Junction area, Oregon Caves area, the Highway 238 that runs through there, Williams, Murphy, Applegate Valley, all that. Very high density area there for bears. So our population monitoring, we kind of do two metrics. One is the age of bears getting killed through our recreational harvest. And then the other is going to be the percentage of females. So for age, we got kind of two graphs here. This is male medium age. This is female medium age. We want the males to be a median age of harvest above 2 years old, and the females above 4. That's typically when they start getting reproductively active at those ages. So, you know, if your average age is above those, you know, you have a very abundant breeding population out there, which indicates a healthy population overall, as opposed to younger bears where they're not breeding yet. So if your harvest starts accounting for a lot of those, then you know, you might be lacking the more important older breeding population of the, or breeding group of the population. So we're doing good here. Everything's in 3-year averages. So we got marks for every year, but we don't really start making changes until we see a trend of 3 years. Our average bear age harvested by hunters right now is 3 years old. So that's above the where we like it. You know, females we do want 4, and they're, you know, if you just look at females, they're above 4, which is good. A lot of male bears out there, younger males, that might bring that down to 3, but that's not an issue when you look at the big picture right now. And then, of course, with that, like I said, percentage of females in the harvest. So in biology and wildlife populations, females are the driving factor for population maintenance and growth. You know, one female bear is going to typically breed every 2 years or so, and they might have you know, 2 cubs, whereas males, they can breed every year. They can breed multiple female bears a year. So one male in the population goes a lot farther than one female. So we really look at females in the harvest. We don't want females too high. You can kind of see our zones here that we got. We really don't want them above 40%, and they're doing good right now, down low 30s. So that's good. Indicates we've got plenty of females out there to maintain or even possibly grow the population a little bit. We're not necessarily looking to grow the population. It's doing very well right now, and there's really not a whole lot more habitat. So as long as we have this amount, we're maintaining and doing good. So that I just talked about was kind of our current population modeling, with collecting that data and putting it into a model to get out a number of our bear population in the state. This study here, this tetracycline study, was kind of what we were using for quite a while. I want to say like early 2000s up until 2015, I think. Very, very sort of similar idea. We were still collecting the premolar teeth I showed on the previous slide, with one caveat. This is more of a mark and recapture population estimate, where the other ones usually refer to a sex age kill model. So this one being the mark and recapture, the first step is to mark your animals out there, a certain number of animals you know that are marked, and then recapture those. And how many you recapture over an area, over how much time, can give you a level of population in the area. So the way we did this was tetracycline is an antibiotic that you can get, our veterinarians would get, and it would we'd put it out in bacon and basically bait these bears in a certain radius. So it was one bacon 3 miles apart, and we had so many of those throughout all of Jackson, Josephine County. And then eventually later, this was adopted statewide. And they would come, the bears would come, find the bacon, eat it. That tetracycline in that bacon would put a stain on their teeth, sort of an invisible layer. And then the bears that were harvested by hunters, when they gave us their tooth, we could send that tooth off, very similar to what we do now, where we age them. But we would also look for this tetracycline stain on their teeth. And you could put how many bears had the stain marking, how many bears didn't, in a certain amount of area, and then how many tetracycline baits were eaten by bears. You plug all that into a model and get a fairly accurate population estimate. So it did change a little bit. Like I say here, we had it at 3 mile intervals. When we kind of adopted it statewide, we went to 5 mile intervals. And then eventually we went from doing this every year to every 2 year or every other year. And, that it probably didn't work as good doing it that way. And then there were some other reasons I'll get into in a second, which is why we kind of got away from this. But we left those baits on the tree for 21 days, so 3 weeks, and went back and checked them. So here's kind of our bacon rolling party we would have. You can see right here on the table, there's these black and white pills. Those are the tetracycline pills. We would roll one pill up in one strip of bacon. You kind of see that here, all rolled up. And we would put 10 of those pills rolled in bacon in bags. And that was the dose per bear we wanted. We would go out to our spots, like I mentioned. This is a mixture of liquid smoke and grease just to give it a little smell and help attract those bears in. And then we nail it with a pretty thick stout nail and a wire on a tree. We usually reach up as high as we could. That way, smaller predators that might be on the ground, like coyotes or possums or skunks or something like that, had a hard time getting up to it. And you kind of see here, we put a bend in this wire, a little kink. And that was one of the indicators to how we knew a bear came. So we did put some cameras on these guys after a while. And you can see these gray foxes, they're great climbers. They would climb up, they would eat that bacon every now and then. We'd have crows come in every now and then and eat the bacon. So just going back and seeing, oh, the bacon's gone. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean there was a bear that ate it. This kink in the wire here, that's pretty stout wire. So when a bear came, they would come up and they'd bite it and they'd usually pull, and that wire would get pulled straight. So that, in combination with any claw marks we had on the trees, would show that, okay, a bear did come and eat this bacon. So we can mark that down as a mark for our mark and recapture study, which was all great and worked pretty good. With this tetracycline study, the price of tetracycline kept going up. The time commitments kept going up for this. It was getting harder and harder to do. And then we discovered something else that was kind of interesting, which might have gave us slightly inaccurate estimation of bears being marked. Was we started putting these cameras, as they evolved and got more advanced, we put them on video mode, and you'd see the fox come up, and the fox would hang completely off the bait and start bouncing without even touching the tree. that would sometimes straighten that wire, which would normally be an indication of a bear, but the fox was the one that did it just by bouncing like that. Other times we'd see the fox come up, eat it, come back down, and later a bear would come up and the bacon was already gone, but the bear would come up, so he'd leave claw marks because there's still some residual scent up there. He'd leave claw marks on the tree, and he might mess around with the wire and pull the wire straight. So we're getting some kind of false positives. That, along with cost and time commitment with this, we decided to move to that sex age kill model I talked about first, with the teeth and the ovaries and the location of death. And it's going to give us just as good a data without necessarily these false positives. But it was a fun study to do. We enjoyed doing this. We gotta get a good idea of where bears were, and oftentimes we'd have trees year after year, specific trees we'd put them on that we always knew a bear would come, and certain trees that necessarily weren't as productive. It gave us a good insight of where bears were and some of their population or some of their ecology habits that they had. Another little bit of research we did recently was a reproduction and den ecology study. This was kind of a concurrent study done in two places. One was in the Cascades up out of Roseburg in the Umpqua Forest, and then the other sister study done at the same time was down out of Gold Beach on the coast. And basically that they were kind of looking to see not only get general information on just bear denning behaviors, but see if coastal bears and the high mountain Cascade bears, one, if they denned differently, if one hibernated differently than the other, if there was a difference in fecundity with cubs. Long story short, no, there was really no difference, but we did get some interesting data that came along with that. So this is just out of Gold Beach, this data here, but we did 20 litters, which had 42 cubs. Our litter size range from 1 to 3. And then again, going back to the color phases here, we saw that about 68% were black and 32% were a different phase, whether it was brown, reddish, cinnamon. So again, majority of black bears are black. And that's something that is a genetic trait and can vary from location to location across the state. I talked to some of my colleagues in the Northeast out of Enterprise, Oregon, and they seem to think it's almost flip-flopped, where there's a lot more brown phase black bears up there than black ones. So it can vary a little bit throughout the state. And then cub survival was 44% during the first year. After the first year, it went up substantially. Those first years, they're pretty vulnerable to predation. They're just little things at that time. A couple other things came out of the study. We found that May 11th was the average date that yearlings dispersed. So a little bit on black bear behavior. They'll usually give birth right about now, late January, February. They'll still be in the den. And as it warms up in the spring, they'll start popping their heads out until they wake up completely. And then they'll be out, the sow, the female black bear, and the cubs. They'll be out. They'll be little, 10-pound puffballs to start with, and they'll get bigger and bigger. But they'll hang out with that sow throughout that summer, and then into the fall. And then when they're starting to approach a year old in December or so, they're going to actually go back into the den, typically with the sow, with their mom, and they'll kind of den that second year with them. Then that next spring, they'll kind of all wake up together. That sow at that time is going to start coming into heat again for the next breeding cycle. And at that time, those cubs are going to They're going to be about a year and 4 months old, year and 5 months old, around that May 11th mark, and they're going to take off on their own. They're going to get out of there, kind of disperse and do their own thing from there. And then the sow will get pregnant again and go through the whole thing again. So it's a little bit of a cycle they go through. And then with the study, kind of go along with that, the average interbirth rate interval with sows. So how many times they gave birth was 2.1 years. So that's basically every 2.1 years on average is when these sows will give birth. So just what I said with that life cycle, they're gonna have that first set of cubs overwinter a second time before they go, and then that next winter they'll start it all over again. So this is kind of how that study was done. They had these snare wires with usually something they were reaching in to grab to eat. They'd get caught. They'd kind of sit there waiting, getting caught, just sitting there. Our staff would check them every day, sometimes twice a day. If we had a bear, we'd come in with either a jab stick or a dart gun, depending on the situation, and we would sedate them. For those that are interested, I believe it was a cocktail drug called Tilazol that we would use on those guys back then. And once they were asleep, we'd put a collar on them, we'd ear tag them, we'd get a weight, we'd get different measurements. These collars are radioactive, so we would leave, the bear would wake up. This was done summer, fall, then in the winter. This time of year when they were denned up, we would go back. This is our receiver here. He's got some headphones on, and basically this collar would emit a radio frequency. This receiver would pick it up. You kind of pinpoint it whichever way it was pointing is the loudest. So you keep going until it was louder until you found the bear den. You go in, you count the cubs, get the cub weight, cub samples, put them back and leave. So it's a pretty interesting, exciting study. This is a colleague of mine. His name's Clayton, and he kind of led this study in Gold Beach, and he has all kinds of stories of shimmying in logs to go after cubs, crawling in different tight spaces in bear dens. So he certainly had some excitement doing that, and it was a good study. It gave us some good data. So kind of get into some living with bears type of stuff. These slides and the next couple you'll see, all the data is from pretty recent, from 2020. I just got done compiling all that. So bears, we got a lot of them here in Southern Oregon, a lot of them in the state, and they are they like to cause trouble. They comprise more conflict than any other species we have in Oregon. Bears, they get in trouble quite often with people. Obviously, more people equal more conflict. You can kind of see that by that top pie chart there. Jackson County has a lot more bear issues than the smaller counties, but still quite a bit in Josephine and Curry as well. But well over 200 complaints we had from people around our area in 2020. And you kind of see down here, these are complaints by month. Our main time here is at June, July. Our slow time is December, January, February. So you kind of see most bears are starting to go to sleep and hibernate this time of year in the winter, so they're not causing many problems. And of course, depending on the food source available, if there's a bear that's gotten real habituated to people, they won't hibernate. They'll stay awake through the winter, raiding trash cans and bird feeders, and just getting the food they need, which is why you get still some complaints in the winter when most of them should be sleeping. course, April, that's when they really start getting active. They'll start waking up a little bit in March, but April, those warm days, they'll wake up more, and they just go crazy until about July. Um, and then come July and August, we start to see a lot more berries out in the woods. So they got more of a natural food source. It drops down. September, October, you get a lot of acorns out there that time of year. So a little bit more natural food source this time of year. This time of year, they're relying a lot on grass. And depending on the year, like this year, where we had a drought year, a lot of the grass was dried up dead by April. So we had even more complaints than this time of year, because if there's no food out in their natural habitat, you know, they're gonna find it. I like to tell people that bears, they think with their stomach and they use their nose. So anything that smells like food, they're gonna find it. So we kind of break our complaints down that we get into three categories: human safety, damage/nuisance, and sick and injured. Sick and injured is pretty straightforward. Somebody calls up and says, "Hey, there's a sick bear, can't walk," or "Hey, there's a bear with a broken leg, it's not walking." Pretty rare for bears. We only had one of those in 2020. Damage nuisance, that is anything from basically if there's some sort of financial component or severe inconvenience. So getting into trash cans, that was our most popular damage complaint. It was 36% of all damage complaints was getting into garbage. So that's kind of my plug for secure your garbage. Keep it in a shed or a garage until it's close to pickup as you can, preferably like with an hour of pickup if possible. Will really help prevent bears from entering and getting that garbage, knocking them over, spreading it all over the place. Other things that go in damage nuisance category are killing livestock. That's a popular one. Had 92 chickens killed in 2020. Every now and then they'll kill something bigger, a sheep or goat. I believe we did have a dog killed in 2020. That's pretty rare. But poultry, whether it's chickens or ducks, that's a big one. Best way to avoid that is put your chickens in a coop at night. And if a bear really wants in, he's going to get in. So what I recommend is put them in a coop and just one strand of hot wire or electric fence wire, about 2 to 3 feet off the ground around that chicken coop. You can put 2 wire strands if you want, but usually one will do it. You're kind of looking to put it at nose height of the bear, and that does wonders at keeping them out of chicken coops. So. And then human safety. This is anything. We basically have a couple categories. One's loss of wariness, so being sighted and not being sighted near structures or people, and you yelling or waving your arms, trying to scare it away, and it doesn't care. That would fall under human safety. It's obviously habituated and no longer scared of people. Another one is actual aggressive actions, whether it's growling. They'll pop their teeth when they get aggressive. They'll pin their ears back and kind of it'll chatter. It's them popping their teeth. That's aggressive action. Usually means they're not happy and they want you to leave. Bluff charges is another one, and of course, there hasn't been any recent cases, but an actual attack on a person or even a dog that classifies as a human safety. Unprovoked attacks are rare in Oregon with bears. They're actually pretty extremely rare. Not as rare as like cougars. We do have more with bears, but most of our bear attacks that we've had in the state involve one of two things. Either one, it's a hunter that killed a bear or thought they killed a bear, and they go up to it and get close without checking to make sure it's dead, and it isn't dead, and it turns around and goes after them. There's been several bites and attacks in that sense. The other one is dogs. Bears, they don't like dogs very much. They're scared of dogs, but at the same time, they kind of look at dogs, especially the bigger males. They kind of look at dogs as maybe almost a threat to their territory, or maybe even a prey item. So we have had some instances where bears will charge, usually going after the dog, but the person gets in the way. Nobody's ever been killed by a bear, to my knowledge, here in Oregon, but usually there's some minor attack once a year or so. But it's rare, and it usually involves one of those two things. So if you guys are interested, there's a study here you can look up. This is the guy's name here. You can Google that and probably find it. But basically, they looked at all known bear attacks across the country from 1900 to 2009, and people have this idea that female bears with cubs are very dangerous, and that those are the ones you want to look out for. Which in grizzlies, this study found that to be fairly accurate, but in black bears, it wasn't. It didn't hold up. This study documented quite a few bear attacks throughout the country, and 88% of fatal black bear attacks were carried out by male bears that were by themselves. And what they determined was that it was more in a predatory manner. They were either low food years, or they were skinny and they were looking for food, and they were being a predator. They were looking to fill their bellies. So a sow with cubs isn't necessarily the threat that a lot of people think, at least when it comes to black bears. And then this is another statistic here that study I found really interesting. 91% occurred with parties of 2 or less. So if you guys are out in bear country and you're concerned about bears, more people you have, the less likely chance. I think most of these were actually one person by themselves, and then 2 got it up to the 91. But I think, like, if I recall, it was like something like 68 or 71% were of single people out there. So more people you have, less. I mean, you get 3 people out there, your chances of something happening go to almost 0, especially with how rare it is to begin with in the first place. But some safety precautions. Don't hike alone, hike in groups. We just kind of covered that. The more people, the less likelihood there is of a issue. Don't approach bears. Most bears, keep in mind when I'm talking about all this, they're not out to get you. Most of them are more scared of you than you are of them, and they want to get out of there as quick as they can. So a lot of times you won't even see them because they'll hear or smell you way before you can see them, and they're going the opposite direction just because they kind of know you're approaching. If you do see them, just give them a way to escape. That could be for those of you that might have them around your house. If you come around a corner and you see one, make sure it has a way to escape, to go off in the woods and get away from you. If not, it might run you over. It might not attack you. It might just be trying to escape, but hit you on the ground on the way out to try to get out of there. But so give them a way to escape. Clap your hands, speak in a firm voice when you see them. Don't necessarily yell or make noises. A lot of times different huffs and grunts can be signs of aggression with bears and kind of territorial things. So you don't want to confuse them with any of that where it could get them aggressive. You want to talk in a human voice so they know you're a human talking. It's a loud, firm voice. Don't run from a bear. And then, like I said, dogs were kind of main thing with bear attacks. Of the few bear attacks we've had, we haven't had many, but so keep them on a leash. Um, so the, and there's some signs with this, usually a bear's not just gonna come out of the bushes going after you. You can kind of tell their behavior um, when they're getting stressed and when they're getting gonna be aggressive. I mentioned earlier, ears pinned back, growling. They're staring at you. Their jaws are popping or chattering. It might sound like that's all signs of aggression. Um, Standing on their hind legs usually isn't. Uh, they it can be at times, but most of the time they're just trying to get a better view. They're down low to the ground with their on all fours, and they stand up. All of a sudden, they're 5, 6, 7 feet tall, and they can see a lot better and check you out and realize, oh, you're a person. I don't want to go anywhere near you. I'm going to drop down and run the opposite direction. So, the last bullet point here, extremely unlikely to happen. But if you are attacked, fight back. Use rocks, sticks, jackets, garden tool. I mean, whatever you got, just fight, 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 and just do what you can to knock them off you, and get them out of there. But so I wanted to go through all that just because I think it's good. But again, don't be worried to go out in the woods. Don't be worried to go on your hikes. Um, bear attacks with people are extremely rare. Like I said, it's usually just one a year, maybe two, and like I said, it almost always involves either that hunting situation I mentioned, or a lot of times a dog as well. Um, so, and then when we do start seeing bears that are uh, consistently showing signs of aggression or loss of wariness, we try to post up signs warning people of that, if we know about it. So, and those are usually the bears we're more concerned about. It's usually bears we're most concerned about are usually in town. They show a clear progression of, you know, first they're coming by in the middle of the night and somebody goes out and scares them away, they run off. And then, they do that a couple more times. Maybe a few months later, they don't run off, but they walk off. And then a few months later, they will come by during the day. And then they still walk off. And then a few weeks or months later, they don't run off or walk off at all. They just kind of ignore you. So there's a progression like that where they get more and more used to people, and that's sort of when we get red flags that, okay, this bear might end up being a human safety issue. We want to start taking some proactive measures. But just for a bear to flip a switch and be aggressive, it is very rare. So some tips here for your property. Like I said, bears, they're troublemakers. They like to get into trouble. They kind of like teenagers. They just don't think, and they or think with their stomach, and they just do whatever they want. So don't feed bears. Don't feed any wildlife. We always recommend against feeding any wildlife, but bears in particular. Once they get a food reward, that's kind of it. That's their invitation to keep coming back forever, and it's very hard to get them to leave and stay away once they get some food. So secure all food you can, whether it's dog food outside, put that in a garage or a good sealed container, a shed, extra bird food. If you have livestock, any grain you have. Talked about chicken coops. That's an easy thing for them to put up electric fence. Gardens, compost piles, they like those. Again, electric fence can work great for those, just a 1 or 2 strand electric fence. Bird feeders, if you start noticing your bird feeders are knocked down, or you see bears getting into your bird feeders, take those down immediately, put them in your garage, and don't feed the birds for a while. Hopefully the bear will move on. The birds, they'll fly a mile away to somebody else's house and eat. They're going to be fine, but You keep putting bird feed out when the bears are there, they're going to keep coming back. The problem's going to get worse. Fruit trees is another one. Again, electric fences work. Another thing that can't work for gardens and fruit trees is a motion activated sprinkler. Could be ordered online, hooks up to a garden hose and runs on some batteries. Those are great because you can put them out in the middle of the night or put them out right before dark and turn them on, and that way it's working all night while you're sleeping. If something walks by, that sprinkler trips that motion sensor, turns on, sprays it. The noise in combination with getting hit in the face with water does real good at scaring bears away, and deer. If anybody out there's having problems with deer in their gardens, those electric or those motion activated sprinklers work real well. So talked about pet and livestock food, just secure that. Outdoor cooking, this is one people don't think of too much, but if you're cooking outside in a barbecue or outdoor grill or something like that residual scent, they'll smell that. They got an incredible nose. So clean your barbecues and grills real well when you're done to avoid them from coming and messing with those and destroying them. Here's a few pictures to emphasize that. Both of these were from Ashland. This one here, you can see this is probably a 15-month-old bear, maybe a little older. I can't remember when this photo was taken, but these buckets here are filled with millet for this resident's bird feeders. They had these buckets down here on this deck that I took this picture from. The bear came, said, "Hey, oh cool, bucket's full of food." You drug him out there and he spent all day eating them out there. So not only the bird feeders up here you got to watch about, but your extra bird feed or dog food or livestock food, they'll pop a bucket open like this pretty easily. So lock it in the garage or in the house or somewhere where they can't get to it. Just setting it on the deck's probably not going to cut it if there's bears around. And in garbages, like I said, garbages are one of our number one complaints for bears. A lot of times people have a habit of leaving their garbage can on the curb or at the end of the driveway and just putting bags in it. And this is what happens. I've seen whole streets where there's 15 garbage cans knocked over. The bear will start at one end, go from garbage can to garbage can to garbage can, knocking them over, picking the good stuff out, going to the next one. So put these out as close to pickup as you can. I know sometimes that could be inconvenient. A lot of times those garbage trucks come and get stuff pretty early in the morning, but if you can get it out there early that morning, do it. If your garbage service offers a bear resistant garbage can, do that. I say bear resistant, they're not bear proof. It's very hard to make a garbage can truly bear proof, but the bear resistant ones, at least if they tip it over like this, stuff isn't going to fall out. If they really work at it and pry it open, they could break it and get the lid off, but just to tip it over, stuff isn't going to fall out like this where they can just easily drag it all over the place. Property deterrence, kind of mentioned a lot of these already, but not only going after food. I mean, bears, they're curious and they just get into everything. I've had things getting into food. I've had bears people had shoes on their deck and they go up and they chew all the shoes up. Hot tub covers, for whatever reason, you got the big insulated foam cover that sits on your hot tub. Bears like to chew on that. They'll grab it, they'll rip it off the hot tub, they'll gnaw on the hot tub cover, destroy it. Usually they'll jump in the hot tub and take a little swim and then get out and go somewhere else. So there's all kinds of issues bears can cause, but a lot of them can be kind of deterred with this. Outdoor lighting, especially motion lights, those can work for a time. Like I mentioned, bears, there's kind of a level of habituation and how much wariness they have towards people. A bear that's kind of coming in and it's his first time around the house, a light comes on, That's going to scare him usually, and he's going to take off. You know, if it's his 20th time coming near your house, a light comes on, he's going to learn that nothing happens and it's okay. But for most bears, and for a while at least, those motion activated lights are real good. Motion activated sprinklers, those work great. Kind of talked about those. Electric fences. There is not much that can keep a bear out. Whether it's a chicken coop, a storage container, a shed, a car, a garage. I mean, if a bear wants in somewhere and he has enough time, he's usually going to be able to get his way in there. They're powerful. They got a great sense of smell. They got good claws, good teeth. They're usually going to get in somewhere if they really want in. The exception to that is with electric fences. They do not like getting shocked. I don't like getting shocked either, so I don't blame them. But electric fences they work great. They do take a little bit of maintenance. You know, you gotta set them up, and you gotta make sure nothing's shorting them out. And you know, you gotta keep the weeds short so those aren't shorting them out. You get you know, uh, livestock or a deer or something might jump over it and make it touch metals, short it out. So, you know, they take a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of checking every now and then to keep them running. But if they're running good, they'll keep bears out. Harsh smells is another one. A lot of times I recommend this if they're going into more confined spaces, like if you have a deck they're crawling underneath, or a shed they've excavated and crawled underneath, and they're kind of living out there during the day. It can sometimes work for trash cans, but not great. But basically, the idea is to put a smell in that confined space that they don't like. A couple of them that work pretty good is there's a couple of commercial products that are capsaicin based, so real peppery smelling. That can work great. Some people have claimed Pine Sol works really good. I haven't seen a whole lot of success with Pine Sol. The other one I've seen quite a bit of success with is just household cleaning ammonia. You know, you got to kind of be careful with that because it can be a little harsher than the others, but a little bit on a rag thrown under a deck or under a shed or in a trash can can really kind of deter not only bears, but raccoons or skunks or possums or whatever kind of creature you might be having issues with in your basement or your decks, sheds. You don't need a lot. Bears and most of those other things I named, they got very sensitive noses, a lot stronger than our noses as people. So really, if you can smell it mildly under there, they're going to be able to smell it and they're not going to like it. And they're usually going to leave. Noisemakers is another one. There's commercial noisemakers specifically meant for deterring wildlife. And then other people will use stuff as simple as a boombox to a radio station. They'll play. That can help. And then physical hazing is the other one. And this, you know, keep your own safety in mind. So, but you can, under Oregon law, if a bear's causing issues on your property, you see it, you can try to scare it off really by whatever means you want. Whether that, when it comes to physical hazing, it can be throwing small rocks or gravel. If you got a high-powered hose that you can squirt, you know, with keeping a safe distance in mind, or usually I recommend that if you're up on a higher deck and it's down lower in your yard or something, so you can, you know, you have that buffer in between you where it can't get at you if it chooses. But you spray it with a hose, noisemakers, cracker shells. I mean, whatever you can think of to scare those guys off. That can all be real good. And so that is some property deterrent tips. And with that, I just want to leave quite a bit of time for questions, and I'll stay as long as you guys want and answer as many questions as you guys want.
Thank you, Matthew. That was great. We do have a few questions, so I'll go ahead and start. At the beginning of the talk, a couple people reminded of your previous talk on bobcats and cougars, saying it was great. And let's see, I'll start the questions. So Max says, it's great to hear that bear populations appear to be doing well, but if forest fires change the forest landscape in Oregon, how would we expect that to affect bear populations, let alone other species?
Yeah, fires, that's an interesting subject. Fires have always been a part of the natural landscape, and a lot of our forests need some sort of rejuvenation process like that, whether it's fires or for a while we were kind of doing it artificially with logging. We do see now more intense fires than we have in the past, which kind of cause a little more issue as they kind of sterilize the ground a little more than those low intensity fires. But bears are pretty versatile. With these fires we've had recently, the ones that will escape and get out of the fire zone, that can tend to concentrate them a little bit more depending on where the fire's at, where they head. It might drive them down to town a little bit, which can cause a spike in conflict, but not too often. A lot of times those fires are further up in the national forest. There's a little bit of buffer, but they'll go back pretty quick. One example, I'm sure a lot of you remember the open chain fire that happened back in the fall of 2020. That went through pretty quick, and we actually went in there shortly after, and a lot of the oak trees that were in that fire, their acorns were fine. Their acorns dropped, and so there was, even though the fire just went through, there was a lot of food in there for those bears, and we started seeing bears and other wildlife move in there pretty fast. For the more high intensity fires, it might take a little longer. You might need to start having some of that grass come back. But like I mentioned, the grass comes back pretty quick, and that's a main food source of bears from April through July. So they're they're very adaptable, and they'll go where the food is, and it might be driven out a little bit for a little while by fire, but usually they'll be back pretty quick.
Francis asks, why is the hibernation similar on coast and high Cascades if the climate and weather are so different?
Yeah, so a lot of that has to do with food sources. One, you still kind of have these natural cycles of more abundant food in the spring, summer, and fall versus the winter. And then a lot of these things too aren't necessarily weather dependent when it comes to biology and different timing of the year. A lot of it has to do with daylight hours. Bears and certain other species. It's just in their biology that when the days start getting shorter and you cross a threshold of hours of daylight versus hours of darkness, that triggers something, depending on what species it is. In this case, bears, it triggers them to, hey, okay, it's getting darker now. Now's the time to start fattening up, and then it gets darker more, and okay, now it's time to go down for hibernation for the winter. So it's not necessarily weather dependent. Weather can definitely influence, but it's more linked to food source and daylight hours.
Okay, Max comments, cub survival of 44%. So this suggests that one cub survives to the second year out of a 2-cub litter, roughly, and wonders if he's interpreting this number correctly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's 44%. I would say it's not necessarily as standardized as that. You see a lot of times that it might take a bear or any species of wildlife one or two different birthing cycles to kind of get a hang of it. It's they're kind of learning things as they go. The first round, their survival of cubs might not be as good when they're younger, but then by the time they get, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 years old, they've gotten a lot more efficient at raising those cubs. So that's kind of one area we see uh, where those might drop. Another is the more they have, the harder it's going to be. So if they do have triplets um, or even sometimes quadruplets, it's going to be harder to raise those cubs. So some of those might not make it, which would contribute to that mortality. So it's not necessarily if you see two cubs, one of them's not going to make it. You're looking at the whole population, all the cubs, and there's a lot of different factors that go into that.
Okay. Adam asks, do they remove the collars at some point, and wonders what happens if the bear's neck outgrows the size of the collar?
Yeah, so most of the I actually don't know for sure whether they remove these collars or not. I think they left some of them on because those batteries will last a long time, so you can do multiple years of tracking with them. But generally, when we collar anything, we're looking to collar mature, full-grown animals. So they're not really going to grow. And then there's different measurements we can use to leave their leave space. But usually they're full grown by the time we collar them, so there's not too much of an issue there. Some collars, I don't know if they've been used for bears, but like deer and elk that go into the breeding season and their necks will swell up, those bucks and bulls. There's actually adjustable collars that'll kind of grow, and then they're either on elastic or on a slider. So as the neck grows, the collar will grow, and then as it shrinks back down, it'll shrink back down. So there's different methods like that, but the main thing is just to collar adult animals that are done growing.
Max asks if you really meant radioactive collars or active radio collars.
Active radio collars, yeah. So they're not radioactive. They're just VHF collars, just like your car radio. They've sent out a pulse. So these collars would send out a pulse. Battery usually lasts. I think these ones lasted a long time, 4 or 5 years. So it sent out a pulse a second, just like a beep, 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 and then that was a live signal. No, it was live, and a lot of these collars had we refer to as a mortality signal. So when that collar didn't move for 24 hours, theoretically, if it's on a live animal, that animal's gonna move, whether it picks its head up or rolls over or something. It's gonna move within 24 hours. So if it doesn't move within 24 hours, that pulse, that VHF frequency, would go from 1 pulse a second to 2 a second. So beep, 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 beep. And that can tell us when we're looking, oh, that's a mortality signal. We better go in and check that collar. It either got caught on a log and pulled off and is laying there, or something happened to the animal and the animal died. We got to go figure out why the animal died.
Francis wonders, is there data on bear-human conflict? Is it tracked by location and characteristics of conflict, open garbage container, etc., or if it's tracked by residences or businesses?
So we track everything that we get a call for. Some places like Ashland have their own reporting website, which we communicate with Ashland, the city of Ashland, and get copies of that. But basically, those slides I showed you, I have some other data that I use also that wasn't in this presentation. But basically, most of that is all calls that one of us in the office, a lot of times it's me, will actually talk to a person. They call in and say, hey, there's a bear getting into my trash, or hey, there's a bear trying to get in my chicken coop. Oftentimes they're looking for suggestions. on what to do or what the law allows. And when they do that, we get all kinds of information from them: name, phone number, address, what the bear's doing, when it's doing it, are they inside of city limits, are they outside of city limits, any financial loss. So we get a lot of information from that, but all of it is directly from individuals here in Southern Oregon that are experiencing issues.
A couple people offered mnemonic devices for remembering how to behave around bears depending on their color. Max wonders, would a deer-proof fence, you may have answered this, with the electricity, would a deer-proof fence be sufficient to keep a bear out of a garden or a tree area?
No. The main thing with deer-proof fence is you're stopping the deer from jumping over it. It's tall enough. With bears, they are great climbers, so they'll try to climb over it, and a lot of times they're too heavy for that fence to support. So a lot of times it'll just get crushed into a ball on the ground, and they'll go right through it. Or they'll get their nose underneath the top, and they'll just lift their head up. They got powerful head and necks, and they'll just scrunch it up and crawl right under it. Really, like I said, even wooden fences they'll crawl over. Really, if you're wanting to put up a fence to deter bears from getting somewhere, it's got to be have an electric component to it, whether it's one strand or multiple.
Maxine is wondering about differences between males and females in their weight, their range, difference that they travel between dens. And then she has some other questions about gestation period and when do black bears give birth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so males and females. Males are going to be bigger. They're going to have a bigger range. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it's fairly large. You're looking at a mature male anywhere from 250 pounds to most of them are going to be around the 300 or 320 pound range. It's pretty rare we get one heavier than that. We have had a couple that have made 400, but that's very rare here in Oregon. A lot of times people, I saw a 450 pound bear or 400 pound bear, or some people, it had to be 500 pounds, it's gigantic. And it ends up being 330 pounds or 310 pounds. So they look a lot bigger than they really are. But so that's kind of the weight for males. Females are going to be smaller. They're going to be a mature female anywhere from 120 to, if it's a 200 pound female, that's a big female. Most of them are going to be 120 to 180. It takes a while for those guys to mature like that. A 3-year-old bear might not even be 100 pounds yet. They take to get to their full weight. It's going to be 4, 5, 6 years. Males might even be a little longer than that before they're fully grown and stout. Because they're long-lived animals. They're easily living over 20 years. Gestation. So their breeding period is in June. So that's why a lot of those yearlings we talked about leave May 11th from the sows. If they're hanging around the sows when a big old boar comes by, a big old male, that's competition for the male, and he'll fight them and chase them out of there. He'll if he can, he'll even sometimes kill them. So they leave. The sows breed June, July time period, and bears actually have what's called delayed implantation. So they'll actually store the semen of the boar through the summer, and then the eggs will finally get fertilized in the fall, and then those will mature and be born January time, right about now, actually.
Jane has a question closer to home. She has a neighbor or an abandoned house in her neighborhood. And she's wondering if bears ever take up residence under or shelter in these places.
Inside would be pretty unlikely. Usually if there's not something that smells delicious, they're not going to try to break into somewhere. But if there's if there's an open hole that can get under the house, or a larger deck they can get under and feel kind of concealed, yeah, I mean it's a possibility. Especially this time of year when they're looking for places to den up. That being said, if you guys haven't had issues around your place or your neighbors this fall or in the past, even if one is potentially in there, he's probably not really a concern. He just found a nice dry spot to sleep for the winter, and when he does wake up, he's going to go back into the woods away from houses.
Adam asks a couple of questions about bear species. One, how many bears exist in the United States, in the world? And he's wondering if any are threatened or endangered.
That's a good question. There's a lot of black bears throughout North America. Typically, the closer you get to the coast side or the Pacific or Atlantic, the more there are, the more higher density there is. There's a lot throughout the Rockies, but a lot of them are on the coast, Alaska, British Columbia. Black bears there's a lot. I couldn't even guess a number off the top of my head of how many there are in the United States. Oregon's probably a little bit above average, so that 25 to 30,000 is probably more than your average states. But Washington probably has the same amount. Idaho probably has the same amount. British Columbia probably has more. Alaska probably has more. A lot of those Midwestern states don't have too many. As far as endangered, I believe there's just the two, at least listed on the ESA list, endangered species list. That's polar bears, which they're actually starting to do better now than they were. And then technically, I believe the grizzly bears around Yellowstone are listed on the endangered species list. But grizzly bears in general, if you look at the whole population in North America and around the world, they're doing good. Alaska's and Canada, that's plentiful up there. They're not in any worry up there. It's just the region around Yellowstone. And I believe actually they're in talks of delisting them there. They've gotten to a population level that's very sustainable, and they're starting to expand. Like I mentioned, the closest ones are in eastern Idaho. They're moving this way, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 to 20 years we had some grizzly bears poking into eastern Oregon. So they are expanding.
Great. All the brown bears, grizzly bears, Kodiaks, they're all the same species, right?
They are slightly different. I believe they're a different subspecies of each other. So I think you kind of tested my knowledge here because it's kind of out of my daily interaction. But I believe there's the grizzly bear itself, and then the two subspecies. One is kind of the southern Alaska coast there, and then I believe the Kodiak bears are a separate subspecies from that. So they're all very closely related. I believe they would all be able to interbreed with each other, but just because there is a little bit difference in their habitat, they have adapted to that habitat and kind of shifted a few characteristics from each other.
Okay. Mahaley's in the Applegate Valley and is wondering if there's anything you could add about keeping garbage cans from becoming a problem for the bears.
Yeah, the main thing is you got your garbage can there all the time. It's getting picked up once a week. So um, the main time to focus is in that area, would be the time it's not getting picked up. So if you can keep it in your garage or a shed, where they can't get to it during the week where you're filling it up, that's ideal. Um, if that's not possible, again, you could get electric fence material pretty easy and put a 2 or 3 strand wire fence around your garbage can outside of your garage. Um, some people have had luck with, like I mentioned, some harsh smells. They might soak a rag in ammonia, just household cleaning ammonia, and drape it over the lid. Um, that can kind of work. I don't really recommend that because you might go through a lot of ammonia, because that smell will dissipate after a while. And then, like I mentioned, this time, take it down to the end of the driveway for pickup. Just do that as close to pickup as you can. If you can do it the same morning of pickup, that's great. If the trash comes at 4 o'clock in the morning, you might have to do it the night before, but just get it as close to pickup as you can. So that's what I'd say for that.
Great. Peggy's wondering how many years is a sow fertile and how many cubs can she have in her lifetime?
So, like I mentioned, they kind of get to that mature breeding age of usually about 4 or so is when they'll start breeding pretty consistently. And I believe they can give birth for quite a while. I would think, trying to remember if this old sow don't know if this one at 17 had cubs recently, but I would say 15, 4 to 15 is probably a pretty safe bet. They might be able to go even a little longer than that. And they'll usually have them, like I said, every other year they'll have a new set. So it's a fair amount of time that they can have cubs.
Peggy further asks about the effectiveness of bear spray when you're hiking or working in the yard.
Yeah, actually, I should have mentioned that. That's a pretty obvious one that I don't know why I didn't write it down. But yeah, bear spray is great. Bear spray is super effective, works awesome. The one caveat to that is, it works great on bears. It's gonna work just the same on you. So, obviously, if it is an aggressive bear, it's life or death. You're not going to really think about which way the wind's blowing. You're just going to spray it, and the bear's going to take off out of there. But if if it's more of a not an immediate situation where you can think about it, you might think about the wind. Like, if I spray this, is the wind going to blow it back in my face? And I don't mean blow it back in your face where it all gets on you, none gets on the bear. Those cans are pretty pressurized. So no matter which direction you spray it, it's going to go, 15, 20 feet, 30 feet at the bear, hit the bear. But with that, you got the mist that comes out also. It's a stream, and some of those particles are going to be there. So if there is a breeze back, those particles are enough to hit you in the face, and it can burn quite a bit. So just be aware of that. But I definitely recommend carrying it. I recommend knowing how to use it. The other one too that can work great is an air horn. So if you don't really want to mess with the spray, and you feel more comfortable with an air horn, those can work good too.
Great. Gail's wondering about bears becoming habituated in communities and taking up residence in communities, and if there's anything that could be done community-wide to prevent having to kill bears due to habituation, euthanize bears.
Yeah, I kind of went over a lot of deterrence and stuff you can do individually throughout the presentation. When it comes to community effort, the one thing I see a lot is the need to get everybody in your community, in your neighborhood, on the same page. We often will see several houses being very vigilant and doing all these good practices. And then one house in the middle of those is being negligent and doesn't care. Or sometimes even that one house might be intentionally feeding the bears. And that one house, they can ruin it for, all other 5, 10, 15 houses around them, because the bears are coming through those yards to get that one. And then they go to that one and they learn bad behaviors and they figure, well, if I can do it at this house, why can't I do it at this house and this house and this house? So, get everybody on the same page. Let them know, look, you're not helping the bears by doing this. You gotta pick up your stuff, keep your stuff clean. Don't intentionally feed them. In the long run, it's best. These bears, they've been living here forever. They're perfectly adapted to our habitat. They don't need our help to survive. Those bears don't need any food from humans at all. They're going to do just fine on their own. So just leave them be, let them be wild. We got a lot of living with bear information on our website. If you just Google ODFW living with bears, it'll come up and there'll be all kinds of resources on there. If you guys do have a neighbor or a household in the neighborhood that's being negligent, causing problems, you can go talk with them. Feel free to give them my email address here. Let them reach out to me. I'll talk with them. I'll answer any questions they have, explain what's going on, why it's best not to feed these bears and keep your stuff clean. So that's what I'd say. We went over all this stuff through the presentation, but just get that word out to your neighbors, get everybody on the same page so everybody's doing good in the neighborhood.
Great. Patricia is wondering about ODFW's policy on relocation on problem bears.
So our policy is we really don't do it anymore. Typically we try to do everything we can for getting information out there so people can do these kind of non-lethal measures, try to do prevention with these things. If a bear does get to the point where it's a human safety threat, unfortunately at that point it's probably going to be euthanized. Bears are in Oregon under statute considered edible meat, so any bear that is killed by us will be salvaged and donated to a local charity organization. The reason it's very hard to unlearn these behaviors from bears, and they can travel a long ways. So if it's become a human safety threat, even with our big forests here in Oregon, they're not big enough to get a bear permanently away from humans. It's gonna find a house or a community nearby and go cause problems there again. Or we've had them come back. When we were relocating bears before, we had a bear in a school. Some of you might know Lone Pine School in Medford. Caught the bear there. We drove it all the way to the other side of Bonanza, which ended up being almost 100 air miles to the east of us. Whenever we catch a bear and sedate it with drugs, or any wildlife really, we'll put an ear tag in it that has a unique identifier. Well, we moved that bear over 100 air miles east to Bonanza, past Bonanza. 2 weeks later, that bear was killed by a hunter on Roxanne, 2 miles away from Lone Pine School. So within 2 weeks, it traveled almost 100 miles back to Medford. It knew exactly where it was going. It knew it wanted to be here, and came right back very fast. So relocation, we'd like it to work, but when it comes to human safety bears, it really just isn't an option.
Maximo has heard that euthanizing wolves, for example, is counterproductive because just younger, more daring wolves will move in. And he's wondering if that's true with bears as well.
I haven't seen that personally. Bears, uh, wolves are more of a group and pack animal. Um, so they can, those behaviors might transfer a little bit more. They might see an opportunity to come in. Bears are a lot more solitary. So one bear causing issues, if he's euthanized, there might not be a bear nearby to fill in like that. And it's a learned behavior too. I mean, um, one bear isn't gonna just know that, if he spent his life out in the woods, um, on the edge of another bear's territory who's in homes, he's not gonna know, oh, this bear's gone, so that house is available. He might come in a little bit, but that new bear it's still gonna not be used to people. He's gonna be scared of people. You're gonna be able to scare him away easy. A lot of non-lethals are gonna work real effective. So it's not necessarily, there's not necessarily one ready to replace the other one. It's a very learned behavior, and it's usually a process that, like I said, usually it escalates over years almost before they get to the point where they need to be lethally removed from a place.
Sue's wondering if, speaking of communities having, like Ashland, having trouble with nuisance bears, wondering if you're aware of Bear Smart Durango. I wonder if it's a program.
I am not, but I can certainly look it up and become familiar with it. I'm always looking for different stuff like that, see what other people are doing around the country.
Yeah. She further adds that she finds keeping fish, meat, garbage in the freezer and waiting until the day of trash day to take it out has been successful. I do that too, Sue.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have the ability to do that, I totally recommend that. That's a great way to do it. That's definitely going to be a big odorous portion of your garbage. Just keep in mind that bears, they'll eat just about anything, so that'll definitely help, and I definitely recommend it. But if you have fruit or vegetables or something in the trash, they will smell that too and could potentially get in there. But yeah, if you any of the smelly stuff, if you can keep it in the freezer and put it out right at trash pickup, that's awesome.
Jane's wondering, how close does the bear need to get before you spray it?
So each can of bear spray, each manufacturer has their own instructions on there. Generally they spray pretty far. Usually it's I think some of the max ranges on those are 30 feet or so. It might be even a little longer than that now on some of them. I mean, if you have a can of bear spray and you're uncomfortable with how close the bear is, I would say just spray. If it doesn't get the full dose, it might get a little mist blown in its way, and that might be enough to turn it around. But try it. If it's just kind of leisurely out there and it's not acting aggressive or anything, I would try some of the other stuff first. Talking in a loud voice, raising your arms, clapping your hands, something like that, just to see if that works. Because then, if that works, you don't even have to worry about spraying. But yeah, just read the instructions on those cans, and they'll tell you the distance that it's recommended for.
Roger's asking, do male black bears attack cubs?
Yes. Yeah, they do. So that's kind of why the yearlings will leave when they will. Not only cubs, I mean, they're territorial, they're aggressive. Even if it's like, if you have a smaller 3-year-old male, and then you got a big dominant 10, 12-year-old male, that dominant male, if he catches that younger one in his territory and he doesn't want him there, he'll kill him even. But yeah, all from those sides all the way down to the 6-month-old 10-pound bears. I mean, if that's why those females have the stigma of being very aggressive, because a lot of times they're usually aggressive to protect their cubs from other male bears, because those bears will come in and that male bear just sees those little ones as competition. I mean, it's just more competition for the resources. So yeah, they absolutely will.
Okay, and I think our last question, Lori's wondering if the black bears are giving birth in January, when are they hibernating?
Then they're giving birth while they're in the den hibernating. So they will go into hibernation, and they will give birth. They might wake up just enough to give birth, and those cubs are usually born. They're born blind, and they're pretty small and still have a lot of developing to do, and they'll sort of finish developing in the den with the sow until that March, April time period, when they'll pop out. And then they actually look like bears at that time. Their eyes are open. They're fuzzy little puffballs. So yeah, they give birth in the den in the middle of their hibernation cycle.
Great. Well, that was the last question, Matthew. I want to thank you again for a great presentation, and thank everybody for coming out and listening to this webinar. If you would like to go ahead and log out, we'll have a meeting with some of the board members and Matthew. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that's everybody. We make sure that everybody's that wants to can turn their mics on. So we've got Maxine. Hi, Maxine, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Just thought maybe you wanted to say hi to Matthew, and thank you again. Matthew, how did that go for you? It seemed great to me.
Yeah, no, that was good. I think yeah, it's always good to spread our message and try to get info out there.